G'day, Professor Joseph Drew coming back to you with yet another video on financial sustainability where I draw on my extensive databases to show you what has been happening over the last 10-15 years on various measures of sustainability. Please watch this all the way through, and like always, remember to like if you want more videos of this particular kind, and encourage others to subscribe and send the video around to key decision makers so that more people have good information so that they can make better decisions. Now, in this video, I look at total borrowings, and that's the sum of total current borrowings and total non-current borrowings. So this is what we economists call explicit debt. Debt that councils have taken out either through the T Corp or through a financial institution of some description. However, explicit debt is only half of the story. It's probably, to tell you the truth, it's probably less than half the story. What worries me more, the thing that keeps me awake at night, is the implicit debt. Implicit debt is things like not resealing roads. Now, eventually you have to spend that money and catch up. So it's every bit as much a debt in a real economic sense as what a loan from a bank is. But it's even worse. Because if you don't reseal roads when they need resealing, and if you don't clean out table drains when they need cleaning out, the road ends up failing. The whole substrate fails. It turns into mush and the whole thing implodes. It happens all the time in Tamworth where I live because reseals aren't done on time. And what happens then is you get to spend about 9 times more money to totally dig the thing up, lay down a new foundation, and put down a new seal. So implicit debts keep me awake at night because they're actually 9 times bigger than what they appear to be on paper. And also, we don't have a good handle on what that implicit debt load really is. But I know from my own experience working with local governments, driving around local governments, that it's growing at an astronomical rate. And as I said, it will come and bite us. 5 to 10 years' time, we're going to have lots more roads imploding, and we're going to have to spend 9 times more money to fix them than what we would have done if we just sealed them on time. So, first of all, before I get into the data, and this is a statewide data, I want to have a shout out. I believe that's the trendy term for local government solutions who have been doing some excellent work under Tony on this issue of financial sustainability, and also the blog Local Government Utopia, who have also been doing some excellent work. We have allies. We are working together and we're starting to make an impression because we can see there's a parliamentary inquiry in New South Wales and for the federal government, but watch my other videos about where they're going wrong there. So we're starting to gain traction. We're starting to get the politicians and key decision makers realizing that there's a big problem. I don't think they yet understand the enormity of the problem. And I'm very grateful for my allies and you viewers in particular. We're well over 400 now. We're getting closer and closer to that target 500. If we want to make a difference, we've got to get people getting this information. And anytime you can get someone else to subscribe, it helps in the battle. A battle which is ultimately about our communities. Because if we're not sustainable, we can't provide the needs of our communities into the future. Now, let's have a look at this graph. This is the whole state. The grey line is the standard deviation. Now, I know you guys don't like me talking statistics, but standard deviation measures the spread of the data. And look how high it is. This is in thousands of dollars, so it's well over $40 million. There's a massive difference between councils with low levels of debts and high levels of debt. You go 2 standard deviations either side of this, you will catch 95% of the councils. 2 standard deviations above the average, which is about 30 million, is what? Approximately 80 and 30, $110 million. That's a huge debt load, much more than a lot of councils' average revenue flows. So that's a real concern. Now, this is going back 11 years, and I provide you with the 2 key measures of central tendency. The median, which I usually prefer because it's resistant to skewing. If you have very big results or very small results, so some councils with 0 explicit debt, That's going to skew the results in the mean or the average, which is the blue line. So you can tell there's a big difference between them, and that's why you should be looking more closely at the orange line, the median. Now, what can we see from this? Statewide, and it's only part of the story because it's very different in rural and urban councils, as you'll see shortly. Statewide, debt was plodding along, not doing much. Great, that's what we want. Going up incrementally with the time value of money, that's what we'd expect. What happened in 22-23? It went into hyperdrive. That is a worry if that continues. On the whole, state, federal, and some local governments cast all prudence to the wind during COVID. Lots of people panicked, particularly in our federal and state governments, throwing money all around the place, paying far more than they needed to if they'd done it in a prudent and sensible manner. And we are paying for that now. That's why we have entrenched inflation. That's why we have supply shortages. That's why we have staff shortages and all sorts of national problems. Now, it seems that some local governments also got captured by the moment, followed the very poor example set by our federal and state governments and cast prudence to the wind. That's the conclusion from this statewide picture of what's been happening with debt. Now in this graph, I've dropped off the standard deviation because you guys tell me you don't like seeing that line. So I've just got the median and the mean. Remember, the median's your best one. It's when you pick out the middle number, if you put them in ascending order, it's the best one with skewed data. You can see in both cases for urban councils in the last 11 years, in the last 2 years in particular, maybe 3, debt levels have started rising at an incredibly high rate, a very scary rate. As I say, part of it is people casting prudence to the wind when they followed the example of our federal and state governments. Part of it is catching up on things we should have done years ago, those implicit debts. Eventually, to fund that work, when the implicit debts come home to roost, people tend to take out explicit debt. So we can expect this to accelerate more and more in the future. So that is your urban councils. Bear in mind that axes is in thousands of dollars. So if we've jumped up from one line to another, which is basically what we've done, that means on average, typically, councils have taken on an extra $10 million of debt in the last few years. For rural councils, things are even more interesting. Notice the axis changed a lot. It's 10 times less. Rural councils tend to carry less explicit debt. That's usually because most people in rural councils tend to be older and they tend to be more conservative in their budgets, more prudent in their budgets. I'm not saying people in cities are imprudent, but country people tend not to like to take on debt. And rural councils tend to be debt averse. What I will say, though, is my own observations and working with councils over many years and consulting work that I do through my university, is that the implicit debt load in rural councils is many orders bigger than what it is in urban councils. You only got to drive through a rural area to realise that most of the roads aren't up to snuff. Okay, so what happened in rural councils? Once again, there's a big difference between that mean and median. So that means that, you know, the median is probably the better measure to look at when we're trying to get a feel for typical, but it suggests again that we would have a huge standard deviation if you guys let me put that grey line on my graphs. So there's a big difference. Some councils are doing pretty good, and there's lots of rural councils with zero explicit debt, or not lots, but there's a few. And some rural councils are really struggling. Some are over their debt capacity. I'm working with a council at present, and the econometric modelling says that they're over their debt capacity, what they can comfortably service. So that's scary when you've got councils in that situation, and they're not Robinson's Crusoe, and it's not just of their own making. Watch my other financial sustainability videos. What's interesting with the rural councils is they're paying off this debt. They had an acceleration. It started earlier than the urban councils, but they're very keen, once again, that reticence to carry debt, that prudent stewardship, they're paying it down very quickly in this last year, which is a good sign. I hope that continues. What worries me is a huge implicit debt burden. When those roads collapse, They're going to have to take out explicit debt to fund it because there's not enough revenue coming through to most rural councils, despite the fact that most rural people pay 2 or 3 times the rates as a proportion of their total incomes as what they do in the city. It's also in part because our grants aren't allocated properly according to the intent of the legislation. So I'm not sure they're going to be able to continue to pay it down. I hope they can. What I'm worried about is in a few years' time when those implicit debts come home to roost, that they'll be funded with explicit debt, and then we have a really big problem. Look, I hope that's helped you get a bit of context. If you're in a council and you're worried about your own position, now you know how everyone else is faring. It might explain why you are where you are. If you want to keep seeing this particular stream of videos where I'm drawing on my extensive database to give you context, make sure you give me a like, send me a nice comment. Some of my viewers do from time to time. It's nice to read nice comments when I do this in my own time and swim against the tide. Thank you to all my allies again, Local Government Solutions, Local Government Utopia, and all my viewers who have been getting me subscribers. We're now over 400. We're getting close to that 500 mark. Thank you very much for your help and your time. Goodbye.